welcome to this episode of What's Happening Waupaca. I am Joni. Today we have got a great panel of people who are going to talk about something I think that's close to everybody's heart in this area, and that is essentially water and the aquatic invasive species that are coming into the Waupaca area and really affecting all of our lives. So we're going to start by introducing everybody. I'm going to have them introduce themselves because they're going to be able to tell us a little bit about who they are and what they do. We're going to start with Ted Johnson, who is with the DNR. Tell us about yourself.
Hi, my name is Ted Johnson. I'm with the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. I work out of the Oshkosh office. I cover this area. I have about 7 counties, including Waupaca, West Shira, which are in this immediate vicinity. I manage for water quality on lakes specifically. Also, I help manage for aquatic invasive species in this area. I also am the grant coordinator. So for lakes that go for grants to do planning or aquatic invasive species control, they would go through me and I would represent them for that.
Fabulous. Okay, looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Sure. Then we have Phil Peterson.
Okay, and I am the chairman of the Water Quality Committee for the Waupaca Lake Association. I also serve on the steering committee for Central Sands Water Action Coalition. But I think in terms of AIS, the most important role I play is as a citizen scientist.
And we'll get to figuring out and finding out from you what, as a citizen scientist, you actually do, because I think that's pretty interesting. Anna.
Yeah, as you said, my name is Anna Caesar. I'm here with Golden Sands RC&D, a Resource Conservation and Development Council. Just a little background, because everybody knows, I think, who the DNR is, but Golden Sands is a nonprofit that works with the 12 central counties in Wisconsin. And then there's myself and my co-worker Chris, who works with 4 counties on aquatic invasive species, and myself, who works with 4 counties. Of course, I work with Waupaca County here, and then I also work with Washera County, being a pretty close lake to the city of Waupaca as well, or county to the city.
Thanks everybody for telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do. We're going to jump right into the questions. And I think the first one today is, define for me what an aquatic invasive species is, because we are so influenced by the media. Of course, the first thing we think of is the Asian carp, which I don't think we have around here yet. Right?
Right.
So what is, when we're talking about the Waupaca area, Waupaca, Washera County, what are we talking about with those kind of species?
An aquatic invasive species is basically a species of plant and vertebrate animal that either inhabits the lake directly or near shore that is not indigenous to central Wisconsin or even Wisconsin for that matter. So it could be from a plant from southern United States or anywhere in the world. So it's a plant that wasn't ever here before and gets introduced one way or the other. And a lot of times they can be very aggressive. And there's not a lot of natural predators for invasive species, and they can proliferate quickly, spread quickly, and become a problem and start to outcompete native species.
And that's one thing that I have always heard, Phil, is that when it comes to invasive species of whatever type, because there is no natural predator, then that's where you get the biggest problem, because there's no controlling it. There's no cycle of life with them. Is that correct?
Right, it's correct. In fact, there are many non-native plants and animals that fit right into the community. Okay, so there are exotic plants that have been brought over from Asia or Europe who fit in. It's the ones, as Ted says, they don't have predators, or they have some unique advantage that they can outcompete. I think that's the key word, is competition.
Right.
So a big one like garlic mustard is a terrestrial plant, but it starts growing much earlier, and as a result, it has a competitive advantage over other plants. So it's either there are no predators, or it has some unique thing that makes it more competitive.
Okay, so then what exactly do you do in the Waupaca and Washera area, Anna, that is linked to this or helps the problem?
Right, so my position as a regional aquatic invasive species coordinator is to really be a resource for the community, for the public. If a lake finds a new invasive species, I can be one of their first contacts to go out and either confirm that it is what they suspect to be an invasive species, work with that lake group or property owner to kind of figure out what are their next steps. Is this something that is brand new to their lake, and maybe we talk to Ted at the DNR and we're looking at, this is brand new to the lake, it's going to be a problem, we should apply for a rapid response grant to get management on the ground right away. Or maybe it's, we know we have Eurasian water milfoil, we've been doing some hand pulling or maybe done some chemical treatments, and we're trying to figure out, is it being successful? So I can go out and map the population that's there so they can see over time, is that population getting worse and they need to figure out new management, or is their management being productive?
So this is for all of you. So I think most of us in the Waupaca area are aware that there are AISs, aquatic invasive species. That's hard to say. They exist here, and you know, we've been told that we need to take care of things, and we're gonna cover that in a later segment. But what are they? What are the worst ones? What are the ones that are causing the biggest problem, and where are they from, and how are they getting into our lakes?
Well, for this area, so far as how much money is being spent from a grant standpoint, or even just from lake districts, is Eurasian water milfoil is probably the number one. That's from Europe and Asia. It's a very prolific plant. It can dominate lakes, but each lake is different, just like each individual is different. Some lakes, Eurasian water milfoil can become very dominant and become almost monotypic or cover the entire lake and outcompete just about everything. Other lakes, it's present, but it's not necessarily a problem. So, and everything in between. So that's one real big one. Another one is curly leaf pondweed. That's similar to Eurasian water milfoil in that it can be a severe problem or just become part of the, like Phil said, fit into the plant community. In our area, curly leaf pondweed doesn't typically become the kind of nuisance or problem that Eurasian water milfoil does. And there's many others. One on the horizon here is quagga mussels and zebra mussels. That's on the horizon, and zebra mussels are in the chain now, and that's somewhat of a new development.
Can I just add?
Please.
We have a specific situation here in Waupaca about what Ted's saying. The invasive plants that are in the lower chain are also in the upper chain. Okay, in the lower chain, because of a different environment, there are motorboats and other things that make the problem worse. We have to deal with the AIS in the lower chain. In the upper chain, even though they're there, they're not out competing, they're fitting in just fine. So what we do up on the upper chain is monitor to make sure nothing's going out of sync, but we don't really have to do anything in terms of inhibiting from spreading. So we have that exact situation that Ted's describing here, okay? One lake will be affected, other lakes won't.
So that depends on how much lake traffic there is, or?
That's one of the factors. There's a bunch of things.
Okay.
Also, if there's pollution, you know, there's a lot of, let's say it's more of a productive system, and there's a lot more nutrients and a lot more plants naturally. The chain, well, it varies in the chain because there's a lot of different lakes, but if it's some areas are nutrient poor, some areas have a few more nutrients. Typically, the more eutrophic systems have more of a problem with, or enriched, highly enriched for phosphorus in particular. That's a limiting nutrient in our lakes. So the ones that are more productive, have more phosphorus, typically have a little bit more of a problem with Eurasian water milfoil if it gets into the lake.
And again, that's exactly what we have here. The upper chain is much more public shoreline, and the people that are on the upper chain tend to have more vegetation instead of just grass. So we do have less intrusion into the lake from the neighboring land than there is on the lower chain.
Okay. So we really are talking today more about plants. Are plants far more of a problem here in the Waupaca area than any of the, like the mussels or any of the other fish or?
I would say that the plants tend to take on the heat of the discussion because plants you have the ability to manage for. When you get things like zebra mussels or Asian clams, they're living organisms or fish that are able to move from place to place. Management becomes much more difficult even if there is management. For things like zebra mussels, it's kind of one of those sad stories where I go tell a lake district, hey, you guys found zebra mussels last year, and my sole discussion with them is how to not get your intake pipes clogged on your motor engines and how to tell your family and friends that are coming to your lake to be aware and wash their equipment before they bring it back to whatever lake they usually use. Because at that point, it's strictly a prevention message. It is not, this is how we are going to come together as a lake community and manage it. So in that aspect, we do typically talk about the Eurasian water milfoil and the curly leaf most often.
Okay.
Let me add that most people are not worked up about the fact that there are invasive plants or animals. It's the effects. Okay, so zebra mussels actually create clean, clear water, which people like.
Disagree with him.
Okay.
They don't create clean water, they create clear water.
Okay, all right. They get rid of a lot of the things that people don't like in their water.
So just to go piggyback off of what
Right.
Phil was saying is zebra mussels almost have this untrue positive stigma
Yeah.
because they're what we call filter feeders. I think if I recall correctly, a little zebra mussel filters 1 liter
1 liter per day.
per day, 1 liter of
zebra
water
mussel.
per day. And what they're filtering out is actually the base of the food chain. They're
Right.
filtering out
Right.
the zooplankton. So think about everything that feeds on that base of the food chain, your fish and other things. So it largely will end up affecting your fishery to some extent. But people initially see, hey, we have clearer water. Zebra mussels aren't so bad, except what they're not cleaning out are the phosphorus and nitrogen and those nutrients that Ted was talking about.
Right.
So we still have that not necessarily clean water and those nutrients that are still affecting your plant growth.
The other thing with zebra mussels, well, in some systems they become very prolific, but they like hard substrates like rock, sand. They'll even attach, the young ones, veligers, will attach to plant surfaces. Now in lakes that have organic sediment bottoms, they don't do as well. So some lakes you could have zebra mussels and you barely ever see them. Other lakes like Green Lake in Green Lake County, Lake Winnebago, they're all over and they can become quite a problem. They also outcompete native mussels, which is a problem. And more recent studies show that they will concentrate, like in Lake Michigan, because they're filtering so much water, they will concentrate the nutrients near shore where they mainly live, and it changes the nutrient dynamics of the whole lake system. Instead of nutrients cycling through the whole system, they're concentrating them near shore. That happens in Green Lake as well.
Okay.
So it's complex, the interactions.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have lots more to learn. I want to thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Happening Waupaca. We have Phil Peterson, Ted Johnson, and Anna Caesar joining us today talking about aquatic invasive species. I'm Joni, and we'll be right back.
When you're thinking about something fun to do this summer, remember 2 things. Number 1, libraries rock. You want to have fun with some new music, new apps, new stories, movies, games, activities, and friends? The library's got you. And number 2, it's all free. Every weekday, the summer reading program is popping, and we're waiting for you to join us. So come on, get down to your local library and join the fun. Because number 1, libraries rock.
Check out the summer reading program at your Waupaca Area Public Library, June 11th through August 24th. Details at waupacalibrary.org.
Welcome back to this episode of What's Happening Waupaca. I am Joni. We are here today talking aquatic invasive species with Anna Caesar from Golden Sands, Ted Johnson with the DNR, and Phil Peterson with lots of different hats. Primarily on this show, we're talking about you being a citizen scientist.
Yes.
So we're talking about what's the problem here. The last segment, we talked about what is it, what are here that are problems. So this segment, we are going to focus on how big of a problem is it? Do I really need to worry about it? I can go out in the middle of one of the lakes and jump off my boat and go swimming, and it's fine, I think. So is it really a problem? Is it something I should be?
I'm going to start off by saying that we really didn't know. It's that simple. The last time we did a more comprehensive study of the chain and aquatic invasive species and water quality was back in the late 90s. So a lot of what we were doing was just guessing how big the problem is. So I think we have to realize that one of the issues is, do we really know enough to say how big or small the problem is?
So is it a problem?
A lot of it is, aquatic invasive species are a problem. Definitely they're a problem. It's somewhat of in some cases, a subjective problem, like Eurasian water milfoil, for example. Depending on where you are, in going to the chain again, the Waupaca chain of lakes, if you have milfoil in front of your dock, and a big patch of it, it's a problem, and understandably so. Now, if you're elsewhere in the chain and you don't really have many plants, or at least not interfering with your recreation navigation, it's maybe not as much of a problem. So it's what's in your backyard kind of situation in some cases. But zebra mussels, they've only been in the system a little while. We're not sure to what extent of a problem they're going to be. Eurasian water milfoil has been in the system for a long time. We've been actively managing for it, spending a lot of money managing for it. So that's definitely a problem. I mean, that's the problem defined, I think. So yeah, but it's under control, I think, largely in the chain. I don't think it's out of control. I have lakes where Eurasian water milfoil is 80% of the plant community, or 50% of the plant community. Certainly in the chain, it's nowhere near those levels. But again, there is a subjective element to it.
Well, let me give you an example. You want to go for it?
No, you got an
Okay.
specific example. I think I'm going to take it broad scope when
Okay.
you're done.
When we're finding now, because we're collecting more information, that sometimes when you treat a species, you kill off some of that species, but not all of it. And some of the ones that survive can be hybrids that are actually more resistant to what you're doing. And in a sense, you may be making the problem more intractable. Not necessarily bigger, but it may be even harder to deal with those new hybrids. And in fact, the milfoil, we actually have a new species. It's changed enough that it's actually considered a different species, right?
You have both. You'll have pure strain, Eurasian water milfoil, and hybrid.
Right.
Eurasian water milfoil can interbreed with northern milfoil, which is a native. We have native milfoils in Wisconsin lakes, and so they can be a cross between those two species and even some other species. So I didn't want to interrupt you there.
As long as they're talking about that, it's important for people to know. I think more people who live on lakes are starting to realize that you do have this cross hybridization of the invasive Eurasian and the native northern, but I don't think people realize that it's not an easy, we have hybrid milfoil instead, we'll treat it this way. It's no, you have hybrid A because it has 10% Eurasian and 90% northern qualities, and you have hybrid B that has 70% Eurasian and 30% northern, and each of those have to be managed differently. The same management won't have the same effects on those different types of hybrid.
Why?
Well, if you're using herbicides, for example, some herbicides you try to use herbicides that are selective and specific to the target species, because you do not want to have collateral damage to your native plants, because native plants are good. And so, you may choose an herbicide that will not, for whatever the hybrid is, will not be very effective towards that particular hybrid.
Okay. I mean, I'm bringing this back to all of our lives. If we
Right.
take enough antibiotics,
Right.
the bacteria or the viruses are going to become immune to that, and then you need a
Exactly.
new antibiotic. And the problem today in the medical community is they are running out of options
Right.
of making a new antibiotic. And we all hear about that, and we're all concerned about it, because if I get
Right.
a really bad infection, I want an antibiotic that's going to work. What I'm hearing is that this is very similar to some of the problems with management.
It's a good analogy.
It is.
I mean, there are some differences, but basically it's a good analogy.
That's what really lends itself to how we try to manage mostly today, and that's integrated pest management, or IPM, which is multi-tiered. You don't try one approach and just keep trying that approach over and over again for that very reason, and that is a good analogy you had. So hand pulling. You know, we were doing more hand pulling, which is very specific. If you go down and you find a Eurasian water milfoil plant and you pull that plant, all the native plants around it, you know, aren't impacted. So, or you try, there's various different things you can do. So, you know, initially when Eurasian water milfoil was found, it was all herbicides for them. You know, it was, oh no, we have Eurasian water milfoil and treat. Now we've learned a lot since then with research in the state of Wisconsin has spent a lot of money on research, and we've learned a lot. And we're learning more every day.
And that specifically happened here on the chain.
Yep.
For decades, we did nothing but dump chemicals. And now, for the first time, we're starting to do hand pulling and
Right.
doing some other, we're trying to build as big a toolkit as we can
Right.
to deal with each situation as it's warranted.
And that's one aspect that, as Ted was saying, it's the integrated pest management at this point. Everybody, it's kind of split when you're talking to lake groups. Either everybody's all for let's just do herbicide treatments, or sometimes people aren't a fan of the chemicals, so they're wondering what are their options. And oftentimes when I'm working with lake groups, it's we only have a small population. I don't want to spend tens of thousands of dollars putting chemical into our lake. What can we do? My position allows me to help them learn how to properly identify the plants and the proper way to hand pull it. If we have a small area, I can work with their volunteers. But that in and of itself is another problem. It's a lot of folks don't necessarily live on the lake all year round. They're up for the weekends. It's their vacation home. People are busy with their families. So part of it is, okay, now we know we have a problem, but how do we get folks in the community who maybe aren't solely living on the lake involved and take an interest in what's going on?
And we've emphasized kind of the treatment, but there are preventive things. For example, if somebody's got a motorboat and they drive right through the invasive plant population, chops up all these little parts, every one of those little parts can become another plant.
And we're going to talk about that, and I like that because that is a great segue into our next segment. We will be right back talking about prevention and what we as citizens can do, because every single one of us, I think, whether we live in the water or not, has to take some responsibility for helping control them and helping to maintain them and do what we can want to do. We're going to take a little bit of a break here. We're going to come back, talk more about aquatic invasive species. I am Joni, and we'll see you in just a moment.
The fishing and boating season is in full swing, and as you look forward to getting out on the water, the Friends of Muir and Shadow Lakes in the city of Waupaca remind you that it's now the law to prevent the spread of aquatic invasive species. Before launching and before leaving, inspect boats, trailers, and equipment. Remove all attached aquatic plants and animals. Drain all water from boats, motors, and equipment. Never move plants or live fish away from a body of water. Stop aquatic hitchhikers. It's the law. Thanks for your cooperation from the Friends of Waupaca, Muir, and Shadow Lakes.
Welcome back to this episode of What's Happening in Waupaca. We are talking right now with Phil Peterson, with Ted Johnson, and with Anna Caesar, and we're talking about aquatic invasive species. You guys work all over many counties, central counties, and not just the chain of lakes, but we're kind of keeping it to that here because this is where we live and where we work, and most of us where we use our water. So what we're going to do is, you brought up a good topic, Anna, about how all of us care in a very different way. So expand on that.
Yeah, so in the last segment, we had talked about how very specific it is to the chain of lakes, but I think it's important that we all realize that we each find value in lakes and rivers differently. And every lake is used a little bit differently. Some lakes are really strictly, the use is really for fishing. People, that's their fishing lake. That's where they know they've got a good, maybe, I don't know, I'm not a fisherman, walleye or northern pike, or that's where they're going for their panfish, and that is what that lake is almost essentially managed for. That lake district is going, this is a fishing lake, we're managing it that way. Some lakes, and not necessarily that it's even from lake to lake, but it's person to person who uses that lake. Whether somebody's out there to go fishing that morning or everybody's waiting for those no-wake hours to lift because I want to get out and water ski. And so it's kind of different when you start talking about who's using that lake. If they're water skiing, if they're fishing, they're taking their family to the beach to go swimming. Maybe there's parks through there and they're using it for the aesthetics of how it appears. Or maybe it's a homeowner and they want to have that nice lakeshore access that they have privately. And that all kind of comes back to how invasive species affect those. I do this kind of similar conversation with some fifth graders in Waupaca and Waupaca County have field days. They bring their fifth graders, and I always ask them, how many of you have seen a lake that has plants growing to the surface? And after they tell me all of the different ways they like to use the water, and I go, okay, you've all seen that where you've just got mats of plants at the surface. And I go, do you want to go water skiing through that? Do you want to go canoeing or kayaking through there? Are you going to drive your motorboat through it? Is that a good place to go fishing? So it's all kind of depends when it comes to plants, or maybe it's the zebra mussels if they're collecting on the shoreline and you're cutting your feet walking barefoot on the beach, how those invasive species can affect the way you use the lake, how you use it as a person recreationally, how it affects maybe the fisheries or the native plant growth. And if we're not there using the lake to fish or paddle or whatever it might be, how does it in turn affect the restaurants and the businesses in town that then maybe don't have the crowds coming through to use the lake itself? So it has kind of different impacts. So when we talk about how to prevent it or what we want to do for management, it comes into play with really what resources are there and how people are using it.
And again, here in Waupaca, the upper chain is silent sports. There are no motorboats, there are no jet skis. Okay. So yes, that whole area is approached very differently from the public's point of view than the lower chain, which has a lot more activities, bigger variety of activities going on down there.
And one thing that we always kind of talk about, everybody goes, oh, but plants are a great place to find fish. That's true, and you always want to have that plant growth and plant diversity in a lake, but some of these plants can grow so thick that they actually inhibit the fish population, right? Am I going too far with that?
No, they can grow too thick, definitely. And it's also if they're aquatic invasive species like milfoil. Milfoil, its growth form is to hit the surface and spread out from there. So you have a single stem coming out and then spreading out from there like a deciduous tree growing out in the open.
Okay.
So they can shade out native plants and become very dense. So they can definitely get in the way of navigation. But I want to stress the importance of aquatic plants in lake ecosystems and rivers, ponds, as we discussed earlier. But native aquatic plants, they hold lake bed sediment in place, which keeps that from being stirred up from either wind wave energy or boat traffic. They protect shorelines from erosion. They're critical habitat for aquatic insects, for fish, for wildlife. Also, if we manage plants improperly and we kill too many native aquatic plants, you get a lot more algae in the system. And so you can think about it as a balancing act. If you remove plants, there's still the nutrients present, and you're going to get more algae. So the more plants you have, the less algae. But there's a balance, again, a healthy balance.
Okay. So what do we need to do? What do I as a person need to do? How do I help?
Well, first of all, I think you have to have a certain amount of knowledge. you can go out there and do more harm than good. Okay, if you're going to go out there and you either remove the wrong plants, that is native plants and not the invasives, or again, we talked about a lot of these invasive plants, if you only get part of it off and you break it up, you're actually making more plants and it makes it worse. And there are laws that prevent you from just going out and removing plants. So you have to be sure you're not doing something that's preventable from a legal point of view.
So where do I learn?
Okay, well, be it the DNR, some of the nonprofits, they have a lot of brochures and websites that you can go. Ted is willing to take phone calls.
Yeah.
That's part of his job. Okay.
Thanks for volunteering on that.
And we have
Phil's phone number is.
No, don't call me. We have the Waupaca Land and Water Conservation Department. So Brian over there is more than happy to take your phone call.
He's giving everybody's phone numbers out except his.
But don't call me.
And I think, but where he's going at that is a good point, though, is that there are a lot of people out there that can be of assistance. Sometimes it is community members who just have a very active role on the lake, and they take on different roles. We have different programs through the state and UW Extension and the DNR that allow you to be essentially, as like Phil, a citizen scientist, whether it's doing water quality or we have the Clean Citizen Lake Monitoring Network, CLMN is what they're called. Their role is essentially as often as you would like. Let's, whether you have your property shoreline or maybe you go to a public access point, is to do a visual check for invasive species. And then they're kind of our first line of defense, so to speak. And then they have contacts like myself who are their countywide AIS coordinator. They can reach out to the DNR. There are specific folks under Ted or Ted himself who help out with those types of things.
But let's say I'm taking my boat somewhere because all I really want to do is get in my kayak and go across a lake.
Yeah.
It's all I want to do. I don't want to study. I don't want to go on the DNR website. I don't want to call Phil. Now what do I do? What can I do, or what should I be doing and be aware of as a person who doesn't want to get real involved with it, but still recognizes that I should have a little bit of responsibility and there are some small things I can do?
Well,
Okay, well, what I think we've mentioned before, a healthy plant community is a balanced community. And there are things that people do that throw it off balance by, putting fertilizer on their lawns and raising the nutrient level. That stresses the system. Okay? Ted said you take out native plants and it opens up the opportunity for invasives to come in. Okay? So you don't want to do things that necessarily alter the native environment. Okay?
Also prevention. Some lakes already have milfoil or various invasive species. Some lakes have none of them, or at least not any of the ones we've been talking about today. So if you go with your trailer, let's say you're not using a kayak, but you have a boat, and you got to make sure you clean off your trailer. There's no little plant fragments on there. Also, if you're using a kayak even, make sure that inside, the cockpit or whatever you call that, inside the boat, you don't have plants that you could be going from lake to lake and spreading them, or even zebra mussels being attached. So make sure you clean everything off and wash everything off well.
Okay, and even fishermen
Right.
with their waders, that can pick up
Yep.
the either plant or larva of an invasive animal.
And I heard before we even started today, I heard something about bait. Can I, with my fish hooks, and as a fisher person, I haven't fished in a long time, but I use hooks, right? And I throw them back in my tackle box and then I use them again. Can I be doing the same thing?
so really what it comes down to is that when you are using actual live bait, you need to make sure that, one, you're buying it from a local bait, a Wisconsin licensed bait dealer. That way the bait you are purchasing is not invasive to begin with. But really, when you are out fishing and you've got your bait bucket and you're out there on Lake X and you're having a grand old time, fishing is great, but I'm done for the day, I got my limit, I'm going to leave, I've got bait left. This is where the law, really, it is a state law. You are allowed to take your bait bucket with your fish, your bait fish, off the lake. You can go home with it. When the rule comes into play is that you can take that bait back to the lake you were fishing on and used it on. If you had introduced lake water into that bait bucket, you know, you got to keep the oxygen supply so that the fish stay alive. If you introduce lake water to that, you are only allowed to bring that bait back to that water body. If you don't introduce lake water, you can take that bait anywhere. And the key really is the water itself. People don't realize that if I don't see it, doesn't mean that it's not there. When you're talking, you know, or sometimes people go, okay, well, I checked my boat. I know I don't have Eurasian water milfoil, and I've got some native stuff.
Right.
But you don't know what's attached to that native stuff. Sometimes it's not actually the thing itself, but what's attached to the thing itself. Ted had brought up zebra mussels earlier, and he had mentioned the term veligers. That's when they're really small, basically. Their initial life stages, you can't see them. They're microscopic. So that's where that water and bait law comes into play.
And if you're a lakeshore property owner, some people in recent years are buying exotic plants from wherever online, I think the majority of them, and they're planting things in front of their lake property or even up on shore that are not native, are exotic, and can be a problem. You know, so you want to plant native plants only.
You know, and that's true in my yard as well.
Right.
Is that I really do, if I'm taking care of my environment, I want to plant what is already indigenous to this area.
Right, exactly.
So it's the same way on the lake.
Exactly. We're seeing some weird water lilies that are crosses between who knows what, and they have flowers that are completely wrong, and they spread a little quicker, and just weird things, irises. I mean, try to stick with native plants. There's many nurseries in the area that supply native plants. They only deal in native plants. They even try to only have plants from this ecoregion, from Wisconsin. You're not buying them from Michigan or Minnesota. One other thing I'd like to mention quickly is that people sometimes, if you're going to apply herbicides below the ordinary high water marker in the water, you need a permit from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources. For this area, that would be me. People take it upon themselves to try to do management and go out with herbicides and spray cattails or bulrush or whatever in their whatever species in the lake. And we've caught them doing it, and in a lot of cases, if not most cases, they're using the wrong kind of herbicide. There's specific herbicides that are approved for use in water, other ones that are not. The ones that are not, like Roundup, for example, is not approved for use in water. Roundup has a surfactant in it that is carcinogenic, and you don't want to be putting that in the lake water and then swimming and et cetera.
Gotcha.
So,
Anything to add before we close?
Well,
Phil?
whenever you have an exotic plant or animal, and we're not saying you can't do that, but if you do, you shouldn't then purposely put it into the natural environment. You know, example is I live part of my year in Florida, and they now have pythons that are just going berserk, and they were not native, but people had pet snakes, and when they didn't want them anymore, they just let them go. Okay, so proper disposal and containment is important if you are going to have some kind of exotic plant or animal.
I think the final kind of wrap-up message, I think we kind of started with, is really prevention. And the whole state throughout Wisconsin has the same message. I brought a couple of our things that have the message on them. It is stop aquatic hitchhikers, inspect your equipment, remove anything you find on your boat, trailer, whatever you might have essentially had in contact with the water. Drain all of your water and never move anything you have. You are legally not allowed to leave the landing without taking these steps. For the case of we're trying to prevent the spread of these invasive species. If we can prevent the spread and prevent them from getting to new places, that's really the goal.
yeah.
Okay. You know what? Thanks, everybody, for joining me here today. Sure. We learned a ton about aquatic invasive species. I think it comes down, for me in my life, it comes down to, I want my water to be healthy. I want to be able to go swimming. I want my dogs to be able to go swimming. I want to be able to boat. I want to be able to play. I want to be able to water ski. I want to be able to do all of those things. In order to do that, I need to be willing to do what it takes to help that water be healthy. And that's taking care of it in not spreading aquatic invasive species, AIS, and in doing the proper things around my shoreline or in the water that I enjoy to make sure that I'm not making the problem any worse. And that takes a little bit of knowledge, and it takes a little bit of research. We have got great people here with great organizations that you're able to contact if you have any questions, because we want to have a terrific summer on the water. This is the Waupaca Chain of Lakes.
Yes.
So thank you, Phil Peterson.
you for
Appreciate
having
you
me.
being here. Ted Johnson, thank you very much for your time today. I know you're busy this time of year with all kinds of stuff going on. And thank you, Anna Caesar, for coming up and joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Joni. You've been watching What's Happening Waupaca. I'm glad, and I'll see you next time.